Last time on the podcast, we talked about how we got into running, but we didn't actually get as far as our first full marathon experience. So that's what we're talking about today. On episodes one and two, I went first. So this time, I'm going to let Liam talk about his story first.
Yes, great. Today I'll talk a bit about my first time running a marathon. My first marathon, full marathon, was actually an accident. That's a way that I usually sum it up. So for 1 year before that, I had done a few half marathons with pretty much no training. I just thought, oh, well, this is training for the next race. And that's not smart. I don't recommend that. But that's what I did a few times. Then I guess fall came, winter came, and big races went on. And in Vancouver, at that time, there was only one full marathon a year that I was aware of. First weekend of May is the BMO Vancouver Marathon, and at the beginning of the season, for someone who doesn't really or didn't really run regularly like me, um, there wasn't any motivation to do any training. So I was ready for the half marathon like I did the year before. They're both on the same day. But I guess in MBTI terms, I am a complete P and horrible at making plans, and that has led to many interesting memories in my running career, this being one of them. So I did not look at the schedule very well. The BMO Vancouver Marathon is a unique race where the half marathon actually starts 1 hour before the full marathon. This half marathon is more on major roads, so they have to finish up the road closures earlier, and the full marathon is a lot more on it's pedestrian paths, Vancouver Seawall, beautiful course. But yeah, anyway, so I didn't think that would make any sense. Why would the half marathon start first? So no need to look at the schedule again. I'll just show up right on time. I didn't even show up on time. So I guess 7 a.m. I believe it was 7 a.m. I showed up about 6:58, 6:59, and I was kind of walking there and I saw people started to run. So they already did the countdown. And as I mentioned before, I run in a purple dinosaur costume. And so I thought, oh no. So they all started running and I didn't even have time to check my bag. I just put like a small mesh bag on my back and put my dinosaur costume on top and just ran to catch up to the runners for this half marathon. And after a few turns, people were like, oh, it's a dinosaur. Cool, look at that. And some things like that. After a few turns, someone said, I really can't believe you're going to run a full marathon in that thing. And I said, whoa, 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 this is a half marathon. He said, no, no, the half marathon started an hour ago. And I said, what? That doesn't make any sense. And he said, yeah, it's 6 a.m. for the half marathon, 7 a.m. for the full marathon. And I did not expect that. If it was the other way around, if I was an hour early, I could just wait. But at this point, there was no way to go back. Well, I guess I could just go back home. But I thought, no, I came here to run, regardless of the fact that I did not even train for a half marathon. So now I am expecting to do a full marathon on definitely not any kind of adequate training. I said, I'm going to do this. And I made many mistakes that have taught me a lot about running. One of which was I thought, okay, let's look at this mathematically. I've never run this far in my life. Maybe I should run like 8 kilometers and walk 2 kilometers, run 8 kilometers, walk 2 kilometers, which is mathematically, I think that makes sense. But I made my walking periods far too long. I never trained like that. So after walking for what was about 20 minutes, my body just went back into, okay, race is over. It's back to walking mode. No more need to exercise. And so getting back into running after the first set of walking was brutal, and it got worse every time. And yeah, that was pretty bad. But it started to get pretty hot there as well. For those who have run the BMO Vancouver Marathon, I think it's a great course. There is a bit of a hill in the middle, not too bad, but for the most part, pretty flat, other than that hill. And then the real challenge is the last 10 kilometers, or close to the last 10 kilometers around the Vancouver seawall. Because one of the reasons I run in a dinosaur costume is it makes people happy. They cheer. I get cheered on. I run faster. Just inadvertently, it makes me feel better and I relieve tension from my body and I just run better. But the last 10 kilometers of that run, for about 32 to 40-ish, that's 8 kilometers, but at about that distance, there are no people cheering because you are alone on the Vancouver seawall. And that's where everybody hits the wall, ironically. on the seawall, and people are walking and struggling, and nobody is there to offer support except for other runners who are also struggling. And anyways, I eventually made it through there, and the last bit was great. I had a strong finish, but of course, I was not actually registered for the full marathon, so I do not have an official time for that race. But I did technically finish, and a very funny, I guess, ironic twist is that the BMO Vancouver Marathon the following year, they chose my picture as the thumbnail when you went to their website and click on training plans. So they did not know that I was not even registered for that run. I thought I was doing the half, not the full. I will say that again and again. And I also did not do any training. So it was kind of a shot at my training plan that maybe I should train in the future if I'm the face of the full marathon training plan on my first accidental marathon. But yeah, it was a good run. I don't even think I used Strava back then or any app to really check the time. So it was probably between like 5.5 to 6.5 hours. And at that time, my roommate was a competitive runner, half marathon time of like an hour and 6 minutes, like really, really fast guy. And he knew I was getting into running, and he knew I was going for the half marathon that morning. And he was kind of worried when I didn't come home. And he's like, "Oh, you're going to run a half marathon in dinosaur costume." It's been about 4 hours, so I wonder where he is. And no texts, no calls or anything. And all right, my phone also stopped working because I was new to the running field. I didn't realize that wearing a dinosaur costume in May and running 42 kilometers would produce a lot of sweat. And having my phone directly in my pocket beside my leg inside that costume was like a basin for that sweat and actually caused water damage and broke my phone. So I couldn't even call to get any assistance to go back in anyway. So that was an adventure. But yeah, in the end, I did finish my first marathon. Uh, Unofficial, it may have been, but I have pictures and some great memories and a fun story to tell. So yeah, that was my first marathon. And since then, I've gotten hooked and done a few more since.
How many are you at now? Full marathon.
Now, I guess now the official count is 130.
That would take me so long to do that many. My next question was going to be, you do wear something inside this dinosaur costume, right? But you already clarified that by describing the pockets on
Oh,
the pants you were wearing. You weren't just wearing a pocket stuck to your
yeah,
body, right?
it wasn't just like a loincloth. I wasn't smeagling it up. There was, yeah, full clothes underneath. Yes, normal clothes, I guess. Yeah, that's what I wear, even if it's hot.
And you also mentioned that at the time, the BMO Marathon was the only one in Vancouver. Is it still the only one, to your knowledge?
So there are a few ultras that have come up since then, and for a very brief time, maybe 2 years, this is when I was there was a full marathon offered by MEC, and I don't think they do it anymore. I also don't know why, but they chose exactly 1 week before the BMO marathon. So why would you have the two marathons in the city? Why would they be back to back? Well, I did both. Did not get great times, but so because of that, MEC was not very popular for that race. So I think they did not make enough money to continue. So I think now BMO is the only one.
There was also a Lululemon crazy run. I don't think it was a full marathon,
Oh,
but they
yes,
made it
I
kind of
did
like
that.
a party. It was like a big event where there's like I don't know, people throwing water balloons and just all the crazy
Oh,
stuff they can think of. I think it ran for a few years and then during COVID they stopped and never started again. Do you know much about that
okay.
one?
That one I don't. There was one, I guess this is probably also stopped, and that was the Seaweeds. Well, I haven't said that word since 2012, maybe, is when Lululemon first offered a half marathon. I think they did that for 2 years and then stopped as well. But then I guess they got the more fun party one that you just mentioned later.
Hmm. I find that so confusing. Why aren't there more marathons in Vancouver? It's such a marathon friendly city. Like the terrain is perfect, the climate is perfect. And then in Seoul, there are how many marathons?
Oh, there's like 4 or 5 every day sometimes for the weekend. Like on the like Han River in the middle of Seoul. I've been running on the north part of the Han River, and I've seen another race on the south part, just like crossing each other in the distance, and that's ridiculous and so cheap. So yeah, it's great.
You ever have to like cross each other at a four-way crossway? That would be
Thankfully, I
fun.
haven't seen that yet. But yeah, I have seen a triathlon pass the full marathon, not on the same road, but a few roads over, in another city. So it was planned well in advance by the city. There were no conflicts or issues, but it was interesting to see two races so close.
Sounds like they're pretty well coordinated. But I would like to see some chaotic races mixing together. Trying to figure out, hey,
Oh
which way
yeah,
am I supposed to go? Like, what color is your bib? Go that way. Be
yeah.
fun to watch.
Actually, that race, I did take a wrong turn, so I guess I've done that. But yeah, I think that would be a very fun extra challenge, trying to figure out which race you're actually in.
For sure. Adds a bit of a mental challenge to the physical challenge.
No, yes, absolutely.
Well, as usual, my story is much less wacky than Liam's. So here's my first experience with a full marathon. This was in August 2023, so just over a year ago, and it was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I'd been running for about 3.5 years by this time. I'd done two half marathons and about four solo full marathons. So this was my first real marathon. And in Southeast Asia, as we mentioned before, they always start really early in the morning or sometimes in the middle of the night. Like this one started at 1 a.m. So my strategy was to try to get a little bit of sleep at 9 p.m. and failed miserably at that. Lay there for maybe an hour or so, got 0 seconds of sleep. And then I went to the course about an hour or two ahead of time, or at least I tried to. So I took a taxi there. It's way out on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, so it wasn't in the city. To take a taxi, and I didn't go there to scope out the course the day before, as now I know that I should. And where the taxi took me was the entrance of the park, but it's a huge park, and the entrances are like 2 kilometers away from each other. I was like, okay, I'll just cut through the park, but they weren't having any of that. They wouldn't let me do that. So I thought, I know, I'll just walk around to the other entrance. Terrible idea. So I try to walk around the park, and it's way bigger than I thought it was. And the guy at the first entrance was like, "You should just take a taxi." I'm like, "No, okay, it's okay. I'll just walk." So I start walking, and then eventually, there's no sidewalk, so I'm like walking in the ditch, and it's like all wet, and my shoes are all wet. And I'm starting to run out of time, right? Because I didn't plan for this. And now I'm like running through the ditch. There's no lights or anything, and I haven't slept, so I'm using up what energy I have left that I should be using for the actual race. Then by the time I get there and find where the start line is and everything's all good. And it was a pretty small one in terms of like the number of participants, less than 100 for sure for the full marathon. So maybe about 60 or 70, a few dozen. And all these crazy people who were coming up to run laps around a park in the middle of the night. It was a 3.5 kilometer loop. So I had lots of time to do that math. It's 12 laps around this park. And if you tell that to anyone who's done at least a few marathons, they'll be like, wow, that's really mentally tough to do the same course that many times. If it's one big loop is best, and then yeah, the fewer loops, the better. But 12 laps is it's a lot to do. And about halfway through, it's like, all right, halfway through. And then it gets really hard because it's like you're already tired and you still have to do that same thing six more times. 3.5 kilometers, that's like 40 minutes each lap, and then they get slower and slower. The first maybe 26 kilometers were fine, and it was a little bit hilly. It had some hills, one pretty steep one, and that got harder and harder each time. Another thing that I found quite challenging was the people who were working or the volunteers or whatever, they were at their posts, right? So just to make it kind of more fun, because their job is super boring, right? They just stand there for, I don't know, 8 hours starting at midnight. So every time I go past them, I try to say something funny. like, hey, do you want to switch? Or something like that. But I ran out of jokes after like 6 laps. So after that, it's just like, hey, me again. So I found that part quite challenging. And it's like, all right, 2 more laps to go. All right, 1 more lap to go. And then I tried to do kind of like intervals, like on the parts where it was flat. I would go a little bit faster. And then there was this one young woman. She must have been like, I don't know, 21 maybe, woman with a ponytail. She and I were kind of neck and neck, like on the hill at the end. She would slow down to walk, and then I would run up the hill, and I would be like, "Yeah, this is my time to gain a bit of traction, to get a bit of a head start ahead of her for this lap." And then I realized why she wasn't doing what I was doing because I just destroyed my legs by like the ninth lap. I could barely even walk, let alone run. So the last 2 laps were really, really hard. Like at this point, it's, I don't know, 5 in the morning, and I hadn't slept. Uh, they did have a drink station, so they had bananas and stuff. So that helped. It would have been even harder without that. But by this point, I really just wanted to be done. And then my total time was 5 hours, 7 minutes, which actually isn't bad for a first marathon. And I don't really do any actual training. Like I just make it part of my lifestyle. I just run, 40 to 60 kilometers a week. But I don't do any like interval training or I don't think I was doing strength training at the time, just running. So my legs really weren't prepared for that, but I still made it. And when I went to call a taxi, I found a place to sit. It was right outside the gate, and I asked the security guard if I could sit there at like his little table, and he's like, that table is for us." And I'm like, "Sorry, I'm sitting here." So I sat there because it was either that or sit on the ground or just like pass out. And then my taxi came, took me back to the Airbnb by like 7, and then I just crashed and slept until like 5 p.m. or something like that. But yeah, it was fun, and I'm glad I did it, and it gave me an idea of what running a marathon is like. And once you get past that and you recover, then I think you feel pretty hooked right away. It's like, yeah, I want to do that again. I want to get some training, and I want to get faster and do more of those. Uh, and I also realized that I want to do marathons in different places. So Malaysia was just the beginning, and that was when I decided that I'm going to make that my goal is to travel and run marathons. And that's the story of my first marathon in Kepong City, Malaysia.
Wow. So the 12 was 12 loops, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. I've done some races with loops, but I've never had the terror of having to try and come up with a new joke every time for the volunteers. And
Mm.
that in itself seems extremely hard.
4 laps is okay. You can do it, but 12 laps is a little much.
But yeah, that's wow, that's impressive. So after that, when you did your, I guess your next marathon or the first time you did a marathon that was not loops, did it feel infinitely easier or 12 times easier or was it very different?
My second one actually took me longer because I hadn't been running for like a month leading up to it for the Singapore Marathon. I got a rush project that took me a whole month to do, and that month was the month before the marathon. So I had maybe run like 3 times that whole month, less than 40 kilometers in the whole month. And then it took me 5 hours, 40 minutes to finish it. So it's still my longest time to date. Yeah. And I remember kilometer 40 was just this one huge overpass. I looked at my splits. It took me 10 minutes just to finish that, that one overpass. Um, I have nightmares about it. But yeah, having one big loop definitely feels more scenic, right? Because you see something different as you're going. So it's not as mentally boring. You're just struggling to get to the end, not just doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah, it adds another level of torture.
Yeah, I think especially if your goal is to do marathons in different places, different countries, you kind of
Mm.
want to see as much as you can and not just a loop of the park in the dark 12 times.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend doing one of those, like a shorter course with lots of loops. I'd say four is probably the maximum that I would do.
Yeah. And you said that shortly after that, like you already wanted to do this again and you were trying
Yeah.
to find new races. And was that right away? 'Cause some people, I know for me at least, like the last few kilometers of my first few marathons, I'm never doing this again. And then maybe a week later, I
Mm.
said, okay, let's do this again. But was there like a buffering time before you wanted to do it again, or as soon as you finished, you were up for it?
I wouldn't say as soon as I finished, but as soon as I slept and recovered that
Ah,
day, I was like, yeah, I want to do that again.
well, I think that's a good sign then.
Yeah, it's kind of like a roller coaster. Like at the time, you're like, what is going on? Then after you finish it, you have this adrenaline rush, and then you want to do another one.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite like that, but comparable.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our first full marathon experiences. Next time, we're going to be talking about our current running regimes. So we have a little bit of a teaser for that.
Oh yes, so I've been working on something new, still working on it. I'm hoping for my next full marathon at the end of October. I'm hoping to do joggling, which is a combination of the words juggling and jogging, which means juggling while running. So I'm new to juggling, very, very new. And last night I finally succeeded in joggling 20 meters.
Mm. So just 42.175 kilometers to go.
Yeah, so I'm basically there. I think in 3 weeks should be no problem.
All right. So more on that in our next episode. Thanks for listening.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.